ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Gold.
See such cool glasses. Just about read. Okay. Good to meet you all. Thank you for coming this morning. I think we've only got about an hour and a half, so I'll try and keep it quite short. I've got a cheat sheet here. I hope you don't mind. I've got a lot going on, and there's a lot to cover, so I'm going to read from my notes rather than just kind of like go on. Okay. So, my name is Ed, I'm from England, I guess everybody knows Great Britain, and I'm a freelance, which means that I supply my work to news agencies. The most common news agency I supply is the BBC, British Broadcasting Corporation, you've probably heard of. They're a very large news agency. I supply their website, so people get to see my work on the international news website and in Britain as well. They've got an area of their website called In Pictures, which is a photo gallery. And yes, IN, new word, pictures, and it's a photo gallery where they show photographs from around the world, all different subjects, which is really nice. It's very diverse, and I suppose my style of work is slightly different because I interview people and their words go into the story. Some people use their own words, I use other people's. It's far more interesting. What I really live for is to take photographs of people and pair up the words to that photograph. And that's what's most interesting for me. And the way I do it, I use an iPod. I guess you're very familiar with these. It's like an iPhone. So you've got notes. Just get inside of it. It's quite hard to do, but you know, notes. And basically, I just type out. So you've got a little keypad here. And I use my middle finger, I just go through it very quickly and I type out the interview. There's definitely many ways to do it. Normally people record people talking with a microphone and then you can transcribe it afterwards. That means that somebody will listen to the recording with earphones and then will type out the interview and turn it into words. That costs money and it takes time. If you can do it yourself, that's great. Otherwise, what works for me is I type out people talking. You don't get every single word, but it helps. Rather than me waffle on about that right now, I think we'll start from the beginning, because I've asked already what has taught you about photojournalism, and it's nice to go from the very beginning, you know, and work forward. So I'll talk about my work in a bit. We're hoping for Wi-Fi, so that I can show some examples of my work. Otherwise, I'm afraid you've got to look at me, which isn't quite as interesting. Okay, so, right, does anybody know any famous photojournalists? Does anybody know any names? Do you have any famous favourite photographers at all?
Ansel Adams.
Ansel Adams. Who said that? The gentleman at the back. Very good. And somebody said me as well. That's so cool. Thank you. Okay. Would you like to come in? Okay. Ansel Adams was a landscape photographer, so he wasn't strictly a photojournalist. And he used something called a large format camera, because in those days when photography first started, you only had really one type of camera. It's called a view camera or a field camera, a single plate camera. I don't know if any of you are familiar with those. Basically, it's a very large box. You put one negative sheet of film in it. Who's used film here? Everybody knows what film is? Oh, Paul has, yes, and a couple of you as well. So like, obviously you've got digital now, you've got film in the past. So Ansel Adams is famous because he would get a donkey or a couple of donkeys, and this is going back maybe 100 years, and he would pull his photography equipment on these pack animals, and then he'd go out into the remote, wild in the wilderness of the lower 48 and the lower 48 states, and he would find a really good view, and then he would wait until the moment was right, and then he'd put a black blanket over his head, and then he would focus through this view camera, put his film in, take a photograph, and then he'll probably develop the film there and then. We'll cover that as well. I'm going to do a talk about photography tomorrow. Okay, so if you're making notes, you don't have to, but if you want to make some notes, maybe think about Robert Capa, C-A-P-A. He's a really famous photojournalist from the 1940s. Also Ouija. Who's heard of a Ouija board? You know what a Ouija board is? Okay. Well, Ouija, W-E-E-G-E-E, his real name was Arthur Felig. He was an immigrant, a migrant from Europe after the First World War. He moved to New York City and he was prominent in the 1940s. He was called Ouija because he seemed to know where the best things to photograph, normally murders, were before the police themselves. What he had was a police radio in his car, in his bedroom, and he would lie on his bed at night when all the murders were taking place in the city, and he'd wear a suit and have a cigar in his mouth, and he'd just lie on his bed, waiting to listen, to hear, to when the police radio crackled into life, and it would say, okay, such and such has been a murder downtown, you've got to get, he would race there and get there before the police, and then he would get his field camera out, we'll talk about that in a minute, and then he'd probably rearrange the photograph to make it look a bit more interesting. So if there was a gun on the scene, he would move the gun, you know, and then move the bodies a little bit. He was really naughty. But Ouija, because you know, Ouija moves by itself around the board, and it seems to know where it's going on its own, where he knew where to go before the police. So that was his nickname. Anyway, also, Cartier-Bresson, that's a Frenchman, that's two words, C-A-R-T-I-E-R, new word, B-R-E-S-S-O-N. He was a really famous photographer. He only used one camera, one lens. That's what he was famous for. He had a great eye. So it's not what the quality of the camera, it's what's 6 inches behind it. It's the grey matter, it's what's in your brain behind that. It's what you're looking at, it's what you're feeling, what you're thinking. Okay. And also, more of a more recent photographer who's one of my favourites is a Brazilian man called Sebastião Salgado, S-A-L-G-A-D-O. So he lives in France now. He's a superb photographer. He's done a recent project called, what was it called? Genesis. He spent 8 years going around the world photographing very rare tribes and the last kind of vestiges of what has been going on in the world before it disappears. So you're looking at going out to Antarctica, photographing icebergs, going to tribes in the Amazon, that kind of thing. So those are 4 photojournalists who I recommend looking at. Okay, so what is journalism? Okay, journalism is the activity or profession of writing for newspapers, magazines, or news websites, or preparing news to be broadcast. Okay, so that's what journalism is. Types of journalism could be broadcast, communications, foreign correspondent, freelance writing, investigative journalist, newspaper reporter, social media, and photojournalism. So if you put the two together, you've got photography and journalism. It's the art or practice of communicating news by photographs, especially in magazines. So ask yourself, why are you doing this? You know, what is your reason for taking photographs? Is it just a job or is it your passion? In my case, it's my passion because it's really hard to make money from taking photographs the way I do. So I live cheap. When I'm back in Britain, I don't have my own house. I might stay at a friend's, you know, in order so I can afford to come out to places like this and take photographs. Does anybody know why I was here before? I have been in Glean a year ago. Did anybody see me then? Does anybody recognise me? Okay, I was here for 6 weeks, from December 2015 to January 2016. I had come out to interview Sidney Huntington. But he passed away about literally the day that I arrived, so I was lucky enough to go to his funeral, and then I was here taking photographs of other people. Now I think Mr. A has shown you my BBC piece from Galena, so you're all familiar with that. Okay, so I'll talk a bit more about the origins of photojournalism first, and then I'll talk a bit more about me. The origins of photojournalism first started in 1853. A Romanian painter and photographer was documenting the Crimean War. The Crimean War was in Europe, it was in southern Russia, so you can imagine that's before photography. So they were using an engraving technique, so literally you're probably making little artistic sketches of what you're seeing in front of you because you can't take a photograph. You're probably going away and making a better picture later on, and then you're going to put words to that, and then that'll be published and shown to people so they know about it. Okay. Right, so you think about how far photography has come since then. It's incredible. Now you've got the advent of a smartphone, you've all got smartphones in your pockets, you've all got a camera. It means that you could all be a photojournalist. And certainly people nowadays are supplying work like citizens. There's citizen journalism. Maybe the quality of the work isn't quite as good because I'm not using pro cameras, but if you're taking a photograph yourself and then there's no other good quality photographs, then that's better than not having any photograph at all. So as long as you've got something, it doesn't matter really what quality it is. So if something like amazing catastrophic happens and only one person gets one photograph with a smartphone, that's better than nothing. So any of you in this room could be a photojournalist right now. Okay? You might have to improve your writing skills a little bit, and we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. So basically, photojournalists are maintaining an informed populace in our society. That's you and me and everybody else. Basically, photojournalists are an important part of a functioning democracy. We're basically recording information known as news, and we're sharing it for people's understanding. So without photojournalists, people wouldn't know what's going on in the world. It's very, very basic. You know, it's very easy to turn on the TV and watch the news, but where is that coming from? Does it just arrive, boom, into the TV screens? No. People have got to go out there and find that news themselves. They've got to gather it, you know. And you've got specialists, different types of journalists to do different types of journalism. Photojournalism should be easy to understand and interesting to hold the viewer's attention. Obviously, if it's of something really mundane, like somebody making like a cup of coffee, that isn't going to hold your attention because there's nothing special to it. So you've got to think about what part of that story that you're covering is going to hold people's attention. How is it different? How is it interesting? Otherwise, it's not newsworthy. You know, and there's also a difference between recording historic, let's say, culture, like people in Galena, for the sake of history and culture, or as current news. So like you've got a flood, that is current news, that is photojournalism, you go out and document that. Or, like me, you're here just to get people's stories. And that's more for longevity, for in the future. You make a book, it sits on somebody's coffee table, it's there for forever, you know, so it's like storing information. Okay, so photojournalism is different from commercial photography as it documents a real story in an authentic manner with the utmost integrity. Okay, so it's best if you're working as a photojournalist to be impartial. You know, you go into the story, you don't have any specific views about anything. You're trying to get too involved. You know, if something happens, you can help, but you don't go in with a strong opinion of your own, because you can end up getting in an argument with somebody, you know, saying, I don't agree with you. That's not your place. You're just asking somebody impartial questions just to do the job and get back out again. Okay, so sometimes you could get yourself in a situation which you're uncomfortable with, it's not really working out, you've just got to be cool, retain your integrity, and do it. Okay, consider your role as a photojournalist. Normally you don't pick sides, I just said that, and you have to remain impartial. It is not your role to judge or have a public opinion. If you feel anything, keep it to yourself. And if you're working for an organization, remember that, you know, you could be in a different country, you should represent your country, be proud of that fact, be polite, be respectful, well-mannered, and also your job is not to be in the forefront like I am right now. You know, you're keeping in the shadows, you're just like being very quiet, you don't get in anybody's way, you don't draw attention to yourself. Okay. So in photojournalism, documentary photographs are delivered to the public as a visual complement to a written article. So it can be for newspapers or television, or sometimes even photographs can be used on their own. They don't have to have writing with it. If the photograph is powerful enough, you can have it in a newspaper without any writing at all, because some people say a photograph speaks 1,000 words, so you don't need any written text with it. It's normally not the other way around. You normally don't have writing. Like photojournalism, obviously you have to have a photograph, but you don't have to have a writing. You can do, and for me that kind of completes the picture. I like to have writing too. Strictly speaking, the photojournalist is not an artist, but nowadays the two can overlap. I have to say, I started off by being more interested in creating art. So for me, it wasn't the story behind the person, it wasn't the person's words, it was creating something that's really beautiful. So I started off by using high quality cameras with really good lenses. I wanted sharpness, I wanted detail, I wanted good composition in the photograph. And I wasn't so concerned about the information behind the person. Now, I would have an exhibition on a gallery wall, I'd have my photographs and picture frames, and people would walk up and say, who is this person? What's their name? How old are they? Where do they come from? Tell me a little bit more. So that's how I got more interested in the journalist side, and that's how I ended up being a freelancer. Okay. I'll talk a bit about that overlap. When I was here before, I was using something known as a large format camera. Have you all been using cameras in this room? Do you all get to use cameras? No? Mr. A, do you have cameras that you provide for them to use?
No, they mostly use their phones.
Phones. Well, phones are definitely good enough. I'll cover that tomorrow. I've used my iPod, which I've got in my pocket, which I was just showing you. The BBC has used work from this before. It's good enough, you know, as long as it's got. I mean, it can produce very good quality. I think iPhone even have yearly awards now for iPhone users, where they judge people's work, and the results are just as good as the bigger cameras you can get. So all of you, as I keep on saying, could be photojournalists. You know, it depends. We'll cover that a little bit as well. So in the olden days, they had these big cameras. I don't know if you've seen them, with people putting blankets over their heads, and the camera has to be on a tripod, and it takes a long time to take a photograph. Well, that's all the technology they had in those days. When I came here, I prefer to use film personally. I feel the quality is better than digital. It also takes longer to take a photograph, so you take more care about what you're photographing. It takes more time to take it, so you've got to think about composition, and also it's very expensive. So
Makes it special.
say again?
Does it make it makes it special?
Well, yeah, the whole activity, the whole process of taking out photo. Thank you very much for that. It makes the whole. I mean, it can make the photograph better. Obviously, you've got to have certain skill to take a good photograph in the first place. But the very fact that you're thinking about it more normally means that you produce something better. So I brought an old camera. I brought two cameras with me here. A 1930s film camera, which actually that journalist that I mentioned to you, Robert Capa, used to use in the Second World War. That was a camera made in the 1930s, which was really cool. I guess I bought that for maybe, I don't know, $600 or $700, but I sold it recently. And I bought another camera which uses 4x5 plate film. I wish I had it here because it will make it more interesting for you to see, but the whole process is crazy long. You know, you didn't need a black blanket over your head. The reason why you do that is you're looking through the lens, and then the light through the lens is projecting image onto a bit of plate glass in the back of the image. So before you put the film in, the image comes through the lens, and in order to see that image clearly, you have to put a black blanket over your head, because otherwise daylight around you is too bright and you can't focus. Not only that, but the image that comes through the lens into the back of the camera is upside down and back to front. So if you're looking at the image upside down, you know, you can't really, you know, you can either do that to understand what's going on, or you just have to become good at visualizing how it's working. So sometimes it's guesswork, you know, it's a little bit unsettling. You feel a little bit perhaps like a little bit uneasy when you're seeing somebody upside down, and you're thinking, is this going to look okay when it actually comes out? And it's kind of exciting. It's like a bit of a test, a bit of a game, because you don't really know what you're getting until you actually see it printed. So that's really nice. So anyway, I bought these two old film cameras with me. I took maybe 65 photographs with a big one. So nobody remembers me. Nobody remembers seeing me using that camera. It was crazy big. It had bellows. The lens used to extend out. You'd get, like, I had bags all over me with different bits of film, and you'd get this big, like, cassette that you'd put into the side of the camera, and then pull a slide out, and then the film would be exposed to the light, and then you've got to, like, get it developed later on. Everything's got to be done in the dark as well. You're loading that film at night, underneath your bedclothes, in a room with no street light coming in through the window, you know, and you've got to be careful that the light doesn't hit it. And then it costs like $700 to get it developed, and you go back to Anchorage, get it scanned, and then you've got your final work. The quality is superb. I can't really explain how it's different from digital. Digital's like 2D. Film photography is a little bit more 3D. There's a little bit more depth to it. If you examined photographs, you would see what I mean, if you make comparisons. Unfortunately, I'm not allowed to do that right now because we don't have Wi-Fi. Anyway, so back in the 1900s to, let me see, 1920s to 1960s, you only had these big film cameras. When then the Second World War came along, it was a bad thing, obviously lots of people got killed, but technology really went ahead. Technology really developed further for medicine, for machinery, for engines, for cameras, that kind of thing. So with the advent of its new technology that came out from the Second World War, you had access to much smaller cameras. They basically reduced the quality, the size of the camera to make it more portable. So nowadays you've got like cameras in your pockets, you know. But I can show you one camera, which is from the 1950s. I carry this as a backup. This is called a Kodak. I guess everybody's heard of Kodak. It's a very good American company. You're using, Kodak are actually producing cameras again now. They were more interested in film for a period of time. But this is a tiny little collapsible camera. It's called a Kodak Retina. Obviously you've got the retina of your eye, so it's talking about, you know, eye and the whole metaphor of seeing, you know, and it being a camera taking photographs. A Retina 2C. It's made in probably the mid-1950s. Made in Germany, even though it's an American company. So you push a little button on the cover here, and as you open out the front, like this, the lens pops out, and it locks into place. Very, very good quality lens. I mean, it's very clear, it's very sharp. You can kind of see it's kind of shiny. That's because it hasn't been used. This is my dad's 80. He's got a girlfriend. She's going to be his third wife soon, and she gave this to me. This was one of her late husbands who passed away, and he took some beautiful photographs. When I first saw the results from this camera, I thought it was a Leica before I saw it. Leica, L-E-I-C-A, is it's a German camera manufacturer, probably the best in the world. They make digital cameras now which cost, I don't know, $7,000 or $8,000, but they also make film cameras. And when I saw the quality of this lens in the photographs she showed me, which are transparencies, there's different types of film. You've got black and white. And black and white is normally negative. You've got color transparency. You can also get black and white transparency, and you get color print film as well, which is called color negative. This uses any type of film. So this is color print film in here. You can go to any store in Anchorage and buy a box for free. This is like $13, so you've got $13 for free. I guess you've seen film, haven't you? Has anybody used film here?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So you get it out of the cassette. It's like a metal cassette in here. You talk about ISO now. Actually, film is measured with ASA. Even the manufacturer gets it wrong. It puts ISO on the back, it's actually ASA. That's the film speed. That's how sensitive the film is to light. So you put that into your little camera. So believe it or not, there's one of these in this tiny little camera here. You've got 24 exposures. You know, you wind it through, you take a photograph. I like to have to work out my own exposure. Rather than the camera do it, you have to manually focus this camera. It's called a rangefinder. So you look through the window here, and there's two little bright images inside this tiny little window. And then you have to focus with this little button down here. So this is what you look like. You're holding this little tiny mini camera, you're holding up to your left eye or right eye, and when you're focusing on somebody, there's two images. When they converge over each other to make one image, you know it's in focus. And then also you've got to use something called a light meter. This is more for the class tomorrow actually, but I'll just cover this now. You've got something called a light meter, and this works out the exposure for the camera. So you need to use this before you take your photograph. So you've put 200 ASA in there, which is on the packet here. That's your film sensitivity. And then you point it, and you've got, the light comes in this little window here. So you point it at your subject. So if the room is quite dark and you want to take a photograph of somebody who's got a bit of light on, hello.
Oh, hi, Jamie. The person you'll be speaking to is right at the door. This is Veronica Beans.
That's all right.
Veronica, Could you please go to the library and talk to Jamie?
Okay. All this is doing is, it's telling you what the different, it's telling you what the exposure should be, so it's telling you settings, it's explaining what settings you need to set this camera to in order to take a photograph which is the correct brightness. If you get it wrong, the photograph will be too dark or too light and you won't see anything at all. So this is what tells you. And if you get really good at using one of these, eventually you don't need it, you just automatically know. So you set the camera to the correct settings. But that is for a class tomorrow. Okay, so that's called a light meter, and that is a film camera. I do recommend all of you, if you can, going on eBay if you want to, getting yourself an old film camera. You can get them for like $2. You can get a Canon autofocus, an EOS film camera. Get some film and practice. If you've got black and white film, you can develop your own film, which is really good fun. It might save you a little bit of money in the long term. And I prefer black and white photography as well. Like you get really nice tones. I guess it's a personal thing. Okay, so we'll put that away.
So you'd want us to get a light meter too?
You don't necessarily. I mean, if you need to go on eBay, you need to know what camera you want. I mean, you could start off by getting a 35mm. This is 35mm. This is the size of the film. I mean, experiment. If you can get a cheaper camera, which is, I mean, this is small format. You've got medium format, you've got large format. There's different formats of film camera. If it doesn't have a light meter built into it, which most cameras do, then you're going to need to get one of these. You can pick up one of these for a couple of bucks. You can pick up one of these cameras for a few $100, but you can get cheaper cameras as well. I've taken photographs which the BBC have used in the past with a camera that cost me $1.50. So, as I said before, it's up to how good you are at taking the photograph, not the camera itself. You know, if it's blurry, that's no good, so you need to make sure it's fairly sharp, but all modern cameras are sharp. If a camera manufacturer made a camera which wasn't sharp, they wouldn't sell any cameras at all. Okay, so, you know, it's a bit of fun. You know, it's very quaint looking, it's high quality. This is the equivalent of like a Rolex watch, you know. You can carry it around in your pocket. I use digital now. When I was here before, I used film, but I'm sponsored by a camera manufacturer called Olympus. Has anybody heard of Olympus here? Yeah, they make some pretty cool cameras. So they were sponsoring me with 2 cameras for my trip this time. The reason why I'm using digital is because it's immediate, so you can see what your results are. With this, you have to wait until you get it developed. It could be that you didn't load the film properly, and when you go to get the results back, oh wow, you did it wrong, you didn't load the film, and it came out all fogged or it didn't work, so you've got to go back out again. In my case, I'm here because I'm going out to photograph a very remote family called the Ashleys. Has anybody heard of the Ashleys?
The Actuallys?
Ashleys, A-T-C-H, Ashleys. There's a Nowitna, is that correct? Is that the correct pronunciation? Nowitna Wildlife Refuge. They are maybe 30 or 40 miles from Ruby. So for just a family of 3, there's 2 adults, parents, and a 13-year-old son. They're living in a log cabin, and they're about 40 miles from Ruby. So they're all by themselves. I'm going to fly out there on Friday to stay with them for maybe 2 weeks to a month, and I'll photograph them. I'll be documenting them. So it's a case of interviewing, photographing. There's all different types of photography as well. Like I'll talk about that tomorrow. But you've got candid photography, which is people going about their daily lives, not really being aware that you're there and you're just snapping, or you take posed formal photographs. Like, has anybody seen Victorian photographs in the olden days when people are very still? Well, that's because the exposure of the camera, when it was exposing the image of you to light, was very long. So they used to have neck braces that actually hold your head with a clamp behind, so that you couldn't move your head. Because a lot of those early photographs, people are moving their heads and they're kind of blurred and you can't see their eyes. And so we're going to have to get an illustrator who's good at drawing and draw in people's eyes on the photographic print later on. So in the olden days, people were looking very serious in Victorian photographs because they had a bit of metal behind their heads, holding their heads in place so that their faces weren't blurred. Because the photographer would say, you've got to wait like a minute, like, you know, this photograph might take a minute. Okay.
That's great.
So, yeah, it's crazy. But the advent of, I know I'm going back what I've covered before, but the advent of the Second World War, technology was improved to the point where they could make smaller cameras with better quality lenses, which meant they were more portable. I wish I had a big camera to show you, but in the 1940s, photojournalists were using very, very big cameras. They were called field cameras. Weegee was using one, and he got fantastic photographs. So you've got this crazy photographer who's quite eccentric, wearing a suit with a big cigar in his mouth, and he's holding up this big camera, not using a tripod. You get better quality with a tripod, but they used flash bulbs. So when the flash goes off, it's not reusable, it's like a one-time flash. So if you don't get your photograph, you've got to do it all over again. So they have big jackets with big pockets, and they get a flash bulb, which is like a light bulb in the ceiling. You screw into your flash on your camera, and the whole thing is massive. You're holding this huge camera, and then flash. The flash goes off, you get your photograph, you unscrew the light bulb, and in those days, if you were like in a press conference or somewhere busy, they would just drop the flash bulb onto the ground. Well, if it didn't break, if you had all these flash bulbs like on the ground, it could like end up like a game of soccer, you know, and you could trip over them. So instead, they would stamp on them and crush them. So can you imagine at the end of a news event, like nowadays, everybody's got their smartphones and their very small video cameras and their nice flash digital cameras. In those days, you'd walk away and you'd probably be ankle deep in glass from all these flash bulbs that have been thrown on the floor and stamped on. So it's kind of like a different world completely. Okay, I'll go back to my cheat sheet here. How far have we got? Right. So as I was saying, the photojournalist, strictly speaking, isn't an artist, but the two can overlap. You've got something called modern art now, okay? You've got people going out and taking photographs for news, for journalism, for newspapers, for TV, for websites, but also people could be using those big old cameras before the small ones came out, which were more portable, for art. Why? It's subjective, you know, what is art? You know, something that you might like, somebody else might not like. You know, it could, I mean, photojournalism, certainly my work is photojournalism. I'm having a big exhibition in May back in Britain, and then my work will be going on the walls from this. So it's basically it's subjective. It's up to the viewer. People, you know, I wouldn't say that everybody can go to an exhibition and be unimpressed. The reason why you have an exhibition is because you're hopefully going to get people in who are going to be interested. Okay. Yeah, as I said, photojournalism, many works of photojournalism and documentary photography have hung on museum walls. Photojournalism is a form of journalism that gives visual support to the news story. It is not a form of photography that is supported by journalistic writing. Okay, journalistic photographs can tell a story on their own and require little to no writing to back it up. The golden age of photojournalism was from the 1930s to the 1960s. So the big camera I was telling you about was the only option until the little 35mm cameras came along, which replaced them. Some people still favour the big cameras. Certainly, I like to use a big camera, but you're going to miss moments. It takes so long to set up that you've got to also work about, it's like, if you're a mechanic, you might favour one tool over another. If you're a photographer, you might favour one camera over another style. I felt like it was a little bit indulgent of me to use such a big camera because it takes a lot of time. People stare at you, it gets in the way, you know. Sometimes it's easy just to get out this and take a photograph and be done with it, but you're not getting the same quality. So it boils down to if you've got the money, if you've got the time, and what your needs are. Right. Yeah. Yeah, small cameras meant greater freedom, and it was easier to print from as well. The negative is very small, and now you can get machines that the film goes into, and prints come out the other end. It's all about ease of use. Photojournalism became a powerful and common way to convey newsworthy events around the world. And one of the reasons of photojournalism is to provide an accurate account of real people's lives. So, as I said before, it's current news, it's what's happening around you in the world at the moment, and it's not necessarily made up. So, you can have, you know the difference between fiction and non-fiction? Fiction is made up, let's say, so you're reading a book, it's fiction. Non-fiction is real. It's what's going on. So I suppose what photojournalism is, the non-fiction version of a type of photography. So does anybody know of any magazines that photojournalism photographs were used in back in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s? Can anybody give me any examples? Exactly, that's a very good one. Do you have National Geographic here?
Believe it or not, there used to be huge piles of them under my table there, but I gave them to my next door neighbor for
Okay.
her science class.
Okay,
She has years and years, decades worth, actually.
it would be great to get them back again. Have you looked through them together?
No.
Okay, it would be great to find some stories out of those and go over them, because National, I mean, does Are you all right? I'm sorry if this is boring for you. No, you're good. No, I'm
She
sorry.
has a talk office, talk in the morning every day.
Oh, really? So you're tired? Bless you.
Photojournalist that.
Well, exactly. Exactly. Well said. Okay. If you want to write these down, there's National Geographic, which I recommend you look at, and they're accessible to you here by next door. Life magazine was fantastic. That really inspired me when I was younger.
Is Time magazine something?
Exactly. Time magazine is one as well. That's a bit more current. I think that's still an issue right now. Sports Illustrated, Paris Match, Paris as in the city in France, Paris Match, Picture Post, and of course National Geographic. So, if you can, find them online. Look at the photographs, compare those photographs to nowadays, and try and get in your mind perhaps where photojournalism has come from. I mean, hopefully you'll find it interesting, but mostly black and white photographs. And that will probably give you an idea of what stories to focus on for yourselves in the future.
So would you always want to come into like an event or something with the thought, like you're using an old camera and you want something to be kind of special? Like you'd want to go in with the same kind of mentality with a like iPhone than you would with like an old school?
That's a brilliant question. Yeah. It's like what we would say in Britain, horses for courses. You know, you use something you could use any type of camera for any type of story. I mean, when I came here before, I didn't bring digital with me simply because I didn't have a digital camera. I could have done. For me, digital, and this is something I should talk about tomorrow, is better for low light. It's really good at finding light. So if you're taking photographs of indoors or at night time, digital is good. Otherwise, I prefer to use film. Now, the reason why I'm not using film for this project is because I'm sponsored by a digital camera company. I've got two of their cameras. This is called a mirrorless camera. Okay, so it's really, really tiny. It's really, really good quality. It's light. It's got a pretty big lens on it. It's got a very good quality lens. And when you look through the back of the camera, I guess you've all used a camera like this. It's not optical, so you're seeing what's through the lens, but it's like a TV screen inside. It's an electronic TV screen. And I don't like that. To me, it's false. It's not pure. It's not really what I'm seeing. Yeah, I am seeing what's through the lens, but it's electronic, and I don't like that. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but actually, when you look at the quality of the camera and how portable it is and how light it is, then it's kind of something that you get used to. Cameras before, when I first came here, I might have used them, but I think I wanted to give the project more of an old feel, and that's what a film camera will do. it will give you more of an authentic feel from maybe it could be the 1940s. Like I took a photograph of Sidney Hunting's funeral, and the casket was coming up to the gravesite, and that was something that maybe could have been taken in the 1930s because the camera was from the 1930s. You know, it depends what you're trying to depict.
As a matter of fact, remember we saw that picture and then we saw the Andrew Henry rescue, and we talked about that old-fashioned feel that it looked like it was, the Andrew Henry picture looked like it was taken during the gold rush.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's partly what I tried to, that was partly my intention. I wanted to give that, yes.
And did you make those people, like, do you do it on purpose? Like, you, this guy is like very on the river.
That's it.
Do you do that on purpose? Like,
Yeah, I took a photograph on purpose, and I didn't say anything to them. Like, that's another thing. If you say too much, you could interfere with how people react. So it's better not to say anything and hope, because it's like an emotional time. We're looking for somebody who's passed away, so we're doing our very best to help out. You don't want to say too much in case you upset them, and also it could affect the behavior. Having said that, most people are really tiny in the distance, so it doesn't really matter. If they stopped and stared at me, it could have been bad. And that's another thing. Depending on how people behave, that conveys a different message in the photograph. So when you're looking at it, you're wondering what's going on. You know, so that was a candid photograph. Even though the camera was on a tripod, so I could get a really sharp photograph, it produced that result of people in the distance. It's like anybody could have taken that photograph. It does convey a nice thing of expanse. If I was closer to them, you wouldn't have got the idea that it was in such a big remote area. You know, if it was boxed in, it could have been anywhere, somewhere with snow. It could have been somebody's back garden almost. So you've got to give that range, you know. That's a good question. I'll put that there for now. I'll go back to my boring notes here. Let me see now. I think it's interesting to just to round up about photojournalism, where it came from. It's like, as I keep on saying, you could all be, let's say you all are photojournalists, you know, ask yourself what you're interested in. If you all went out and did a project about trees in snow, it depends what kind of angle you want to do it on. Why is it journalism? Why is it interesting? You know, you would really have to think hard about how you can make it interesting. You know, you're very lucky because you're in a really fantastic environment here. Depending on what Mr. A gives you as projects in the future, think about what could be newsworthy. I mean, certainly, I would suggest that you all keep journals, that you all practice writing, that you all try and get your own website. If you can't get a website, it's really easy to go on Google and you can get yourself a web album.
We do have our own website.
Oh, superb. And does everybody have their own individual website?
No, unfortunately not. It would be blocked by our school.
Understood. Okay.
Sorry about that.
No, that's good. I mean, in the future, if you can think about perhaps starting to put photographs together on your own personal laptop or on your iPhones or on iPads. I mean, you know, ask yourself, what is your interest? You know, I started off, and I wish I could show you the photographs, but for me personally, I was always interested in taking photographs. I always wanted to record something with a camera. So for years I was taking photographs and not really fully understanding how the camera worked and not really fully understanding what it was that I was interested in. So I would say you've got to find yourself something that you're really interested in for it to be appealing for you. If you're not interested, you're not going to put your best effort into it. So for me, I started off by living in the countryside, like all of you guys. You're living out here in the wild of Alaska. But I was interested in old people and old people's stories. I was concerned that if the stories disappeared, then people would forget. And I think it's kind of interesting. If you're living a long life, you've got all that experience, it's nice to kind of record it before that person moves on. You know? And also to take a photograph as well. So, let me see now. How old are you, all of you, more or less? 15, 16, 17?
17, 18.
18, wow, awesome. Okay, very good. Well, I was taking photographs from the age of 8, and when I was 18, I was taking lousy photographs. I've been taking photographs for 10 years, and I still really didn't know how to use a camera very well. I'm self-taught. Nobody taught me how to use a camera. And I studied graphic design at college up to a master's degree. I did a bachelor's and a master's degree, but I was always concerned if I was taught photography, it would take away my enjoyment from it. It would change the way I look at things. So, in 1992, I was 23. I remember the day I took my first good photograph. It was of, have you heard of a Holocaust in World War II? Where it was a Holocaust survivor. And I went next door to a house where there was a little boy he called Joey, and he was going out to a children's tea party, and he had like a bow tie on and some nice clothes. He was very smart. And this old man, who was this Holocaust survivor, was friends with Joey, and they held hands. It was really cute. And there's a backdrop of like a vegetable garden, somebody's garden, and a little wind propeller that he used to make for people, that the wind used to catch, it used to spin around. And they're just looking very solemnly at the camera. It could have been from the 1940s. That was my first good photograph when I was 23. So I always kept a camera with me, and I was working out of doors doing different manual labouring jobs. I was like working on farms, I was helping somebody cut down trees. I always had a little camera with me, so I was taking photographs. So that was kind of like for personal enjoyment, and I was more interested in creating art and taking sharp photographs with the camera and getting good quality. So like a good quality lens, like on that camera, was really important. And then I started to realise that you had to put words to a photograph to make it more interesting, to complete the whole story. And then you've got to start looking at what is news, what is newsworthy. So, like in the future, perhaps you might want to look at, maybe you've got a relative in Galena who you think is really interesting. Maybe their passion is snow machines. So maybe you want to go up to them and say, okay, can I take your photograph, working on the snow machine, riding the snow machine, perhaps looking at literature to do with snow machines, and build a big picture about them. It doesn't have to be the same photograph every single time, but you could write a story about them. How old were you when you rode your first snow machine? What was the name of it? What was the make of it? Who inspired you? Did you have any favourite iron dog riders from now? That kind of thing. Put the whole picture together. That's how you can start to do your own photojournalism. So, it doesn't have to be boring. Maybe what I've covered isn't that interesting to you, but you can make it interesting to yourselves. It's like, if I said to you, what is your hobby, your favourite hobby in Galena? What is the thing you most like to do out of anything? Work out at the gym. Okay, fantastic. Well, by coincidence, I did a project about gym users for the BBC last year. So I was going to the gym, working out for various reasons. I wanted to keep fit. And I was looking around thinking, these people are incredible. Their whole life is just about using the gym. So I said to my editor on the BBC, can I photograph the gym? He says, by all means, go ahead. Well, the reason why I wanted to photograph them was because a couple of people had caught my eye who were really different. And actually, they never featured in it. The whole idea changed. But basically, I'd go up to people while they were working out. I'd work out myself first, have a shower, come back up with my regular clothes on, and just get really close to them. And as I say, if your photograph isn't working, it's because you're not close enough. So always try and get focused, close. Obviously, make sure that it's sharp. But, if your photograph is boring, it's probably because that person's in a distance and you can't even see their face. So you get as close as you dare to, obviously still try and compose it and keep it interesting. But I took photographs. It's a shame I can't show you now. I would like to. But basically, you've got really lots of close-up photographs, and it's interesting their expressions. When they're working out and you're making that face, it's like really painful. Yeah. Well, those are the photographs I was taking, and then you're interviewing them as well. That you can call photojournalism.
Wait, you're interviewing them while they're working?
Not while they're doing that. They won't get to say anything. They're making these crazy faces. But no, I did afterwards. So I let them calm down, and then I'd come and sit with me before they would leave the building, before they leave the gym. So that was really cool. I probably submitted 30 or 40 photographs to my editor. So what I do, I take the photograph, I interview on my iPod, and then I copy and paste. It's so quick. So you copy and paste it to a web album, and I just send a link to the web album to my editor, and he chooses the photographs from that web album and the writing, and he puts it together. In the past, I've tried suggesting to him what would work. Could you use this photograph with this, and could you use this for the writing? Because what that person said was really interesting, but he doesn't say anything back. He just does what he has to do, because that's his job. I'm not the editor, I'm a photographer. So, what is your favourite hobby? What is your interest?
Wrestling.
Wrestling? No way. Are you a wrestler?
Oh yeah, she went to state.
Seriously.
Seriously.
That's so cool. Okay, well, maybe you could take some selfies. Maybe you could set up a photograph, a camera on a tripod, and then start wrestling and take a series of photographs of yourself. You could get a GoPro, and then you could write your own words about yourself. That would be one form of photojournalism, And then you could put it together in a web album with Google and present it to Mr. A and say, hey, look what I've done. Now, when I left school, I went to art college and I started photography. I didn't really know what I was doing, and my teacher was getting fed up with me because I wasn't really trying my hardest, and I didn't have much creative idea. I was just like, this is such a big subject and such a big world, and I'm just such a little grain of sand in it, I'm kind of floundering. Well, the technician working in the photography lab said to me one day, Ed, it would really impress your photography tutor if you went away and you went and photographed the subject. So I went to the pub. Do you have pubs here? I went to the bar, photographed people in the bar, and I interviewed them, and I wrote down notes on a bit of paper. But in those days, before computers, because I'm that old, believe it or not, I went back home and I got a typewriter and I typed out the interviews, and I cut out the paper and I made a book. So I got paper and I stitched it together myself with a needle and thread, and I stuck the photographs in and I stuck the writing in that I typed out of people's interviews. And I walked up to him and I said, here you go, sir, what do you think of this? He was like, wow, now I'm proud of you because I can see you're actually, making an effort. So if you want to get double A's or treble A's or whatever your top score is here, then go away and do that, make it into a book, make it into a little magazine, make it into maybe 10, 20 pages, make a web album online and send a link to Mr. A and he will be proud of you. So that's a good way to start your photojournalism careers if you want. Okay. Also think about how your work is used. Is it used online or is it printed? You don't need good quality nowadays because what you're seeing on the computer screen is so small, you don't need a lens that long with a camera that costs $10,000. Just use your smartphone. Yeah, if it's just being viewed online, if it's not being printed, you don't have to worry about the quality of the camera. There's nothing stopping you from going out and doing your own photojournalism. So what you could do, you could start your own newspaper in Galena. All of you could go out and you could document gym, you could document wrestling, and then all of you could document different things, like in the summer fishing. Yes?
I hate to brag, but I'm going to brag. Because
Yeah,
I love
brag.
these guys,
He will
these
brag.
guys in this room. We are the only newspaper in Galena.
Oh, you really? That's superb.
Yes.
So I was on the
It's
right
really
track
cool.
then. Excellent.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Online news?
Yeah.
Any news. We have a local radio station. They do beautiful work. They have the guy who is the reporter there does a report once a day at 7:04. It's a 2-minute story. But that's it. Otherwise, we are it.
I'm really pleased to hear that. That's impressive.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
And this is why our motto is the only newspaper in the entire world that gives a damn about Galena, Alaska.
It sounds like it, yes. I hope that continues. I mean, this is something you could do at school. This is something you could do when you leave school. You can continue as a career for the rest of your lives. I've met Tim Bodoni, who talks on the radio.
Good
There's
guy.
no reason why you can't set up your own news service yourselves online. If you've got access to internet, just print out business cards, hand them out to people and say, check this out, this is what I'm doing. I'm doing something about the Northern Lights. So when the Aurora Borealis come, the Northern Lights at night, whenever it is, I guess you get those here, don't you?
Yeah.
Well, you could go out with a tripod, you could take really nice photographs at night and upload them. People from around the world can start looking at it. That's how good the internet is. People from around the world could become your audience, the people that are liking your work. So that's another thing you could do. Anyway, people are consuming news. There's a word called voraciously, like they're really consuming news. They want to eat it. It's like they've got a big appetite for news. They want to see as much as they can. People don't care where it's coming from as long as they're seeing it. So you've got to be spontaneous. You've got to be quick. Don't just do one bit of work about the gym or wrestling and then go dead. Do something else. Keep on the ball. Be interested in life. I've written here that you should, as I've said already, you should all keep a journal. You should all try and have your own website, or at least a web album of your own work. And as I said already, citizen photojournalism could be any of you. The lack of quality and the lack of substance can be criticised. So if you're not a pro, people can say, well, actually it's not really that good. But don't give up. Keep on going out and keep on doing your best, keep on striving to produce work. I mean, does anybody here, if I haven't put you off, does anybody here think they want to be photojournalists? Perhaps, or good. Well, you're inquisitive because you're asking questions, and that's a good start. Keep on, being interested in stuff. It's excellent. Yeah, well, I mean,
I don't know, it might be your accent that makes it cool or something.
well, if you went to England, you would be cool because of your accent.
Well, what accent? Just didn't know.
Your American accent, your Galena accent. What else we got? I'll try and round this up now.
So,
the paper.
You know how in regular journalism, there's a lot, you can get in trouble for what's that, libel or something?
Yeah.
And the same stuff could happen with photojournalism, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've got in trouble before. You always need to have permission to take a photograph in a private place, but in a public place there's a law called expectations of privacy. So I would recommend you always ask for permission before you interview somebody. Obviously, if they don't want to be interviewed, they're not going to talk to you, but they might not want a photograph taken, and you take it anyway. If you take it in a private place, they might be able to prosecute you and take you to take you to court if they don't want you to use that photograph. Otherwise, it's in a public place like out of doors. It could be in a gymnasium in a school. You could say that's a public place. Then you could take a photograph without somebody knowing. You could still use it. So you have to be careful. It depends. If you're in an environment where it's critical that you cover that bit of news and you need to have a result at the end of it, take the photograph regardless. Otherwise, if you're being a bit more kind of calm about it, like you're in Galena, you're taking photographs of people, you don't want to upset anybody. So you ask for permission. Take your time. Be respectful to people. That was a really good question.
Can I jump in here for a second?
Yeah.
Because we are, students in a class.
Yeah.
The basic standard that we're using here is actually more of a higher standard that you might have in professional journalism. If we have a source that says to us, I don't want to speak to you, the students have been told, the thing you do is you say thank you and you move on.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're a small town, we're a small school, these are students. We don't want to put them in an uncomfortable position. And, we are a class in a school, so there's an extra layer of representing a school, which is a public institution. So the rules are slightly different for us than there would be in a
That sounds
private
very
institution.
good. That's impressive. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. That's the best thing to do. Sometimes it's hard to move on. Sometimes you really feel like you need to have a result from what you're working at. If I've flown all the way here from Britain, especially to take photographs of that remote family, and they decided to get in contact with me via their satellite phone soon and said, sorry, you can't come out, I would be broken-hearted. There's nothing you can do about it. You could get in contact and say, oh, please, guys, I'll do anything, to come out. It's their decision, and I can't dispute that. So you've got to be pretty cool about it, So also, if you're a photojournalist, to try and make it sound a little bit more interesting, it's not just a case of doing a 9-to-5 job where you get on an aeroplane, you go and take photographs, and you come back. You've got to be flexible. You've got to be cool. You've got to be logistically minded. You've got to be able to plan. You've got to be a fundraiser. You've got to get money from somewhere. If you're not earning enough money from the job, if you're not paying you enough, like me, you've got to make money from elsewhere. So I've got to do other types of photography jobs to save enough money to come here to afford the airline ticket, travel insurance in case I get ill, that kind of thing. Because I'm doing this because this is my hobby, this is my passion. I've just spent the last 9 months living in a barn in Essex, which wasn't heated. So it's not as cold as it is here, but it means that I've been sleeping in a sleeping bag, that I've eaten cold food, I can't even cook food because I don't have anything to cook on. I'm trying to save money. So not everybody is like me. Most people have a home in Essex, like in England where I come from. But this is what I would rather do than a 9 to 5. I've got lots of friends who are doing, you know, a 9 to 5, you work from 9 AM until 5 PM and you go home and forget about your job. Most people hate their jobs and they're only earning money so they can afford to stay in a house and pay rent. And 3/4 of their income is going towards paying the rent. Well, I don't want to do that. I got to a point in my life where I decided to put my foot down and say, I want to enjoy myself and have some fun and do what I want to do. So if any of you have got any dreams that you really want to do, don't be put off by anybody saying you can't do it because you can't afford to do it. Just make it happen. So I'm talking to you now because I don't have a 9 to 5 back in Britain. So this is my passion, to be here in Galena, photograph people, you know, and talk to people like you. So if you've got survival skills, it helps. If you're in somewhere remote like here, I don't necessarily have very good survival skills, but if I, you know, I would like to think that if I got in a problem, I'll be okay. A mechanic, I like motorbikes. Who likes riding motorbikes here? You know, motorbikes are cool, snow machines, engines, you know. It's like, it's not just about photography. It's like in the summer, who's heard of the Outcam? Yeah, it's the Alaska-Canada highway. It goes from Dawson Creek in the south of Canada, goes up into Alaska. The American Army built it in 1942, I think, because the Japanese were invading the Aleutian Islands, and the American Army needed to cut the Japanese off, so they had to get up into Alaska quickly. Well, back in those days, in the 1940s, 75 years ago, there were no roads going from south to north. So literally they built a road so they could get up here. And that road obviously still exists. So lots of car drivers, motorcyclists, lorry drivers, truck drivers are using it. Me, I've got a motorbike in Anchorage, so this summer I'll be documenting the Alaska-Canada highway. That's photojournalism. Right now I'm talking with the Yukon Tourism Agency and the British Columbia Tourism Agency about giving me money so that I can fly the length of it. So I'll be taking photographs out of an aeroplane.
Well, wait a second. You are getting paid to ride a motorcycle on the Alaska highway. You are the luckiest man on the planet.
Yeah, if you break it down, you could say it's probably like 1 cent every 100 miles, Mr. A.
Even so, man, oh man.
Yeah, it sounds
Wow.
pretty good. On the flip side, I won't be eating properly because I can't afford to. I'll be staying in a tent. I've got a really cool motorbike, which I'll be riding maybe a couple of 100 miles every day. And the BBC will pay me the equivalent of about $450 if I'm lucky for a piece that I'll put a huge amount of money into. So like this piece now, I will have spent maybe $2,000 to get here and to leave from here, to pay for everything, but I'll be earning maybe $350. My work, I know, is worth far more than that. But then if it's shown on the BBC, and you see my work on the BBC, money can't buy that kind of opportunity, you know, because it's like the world's biggest broadcasting company, maybe millions of people get to see it online. So if I like produced work and phoned up the editor and said, hey, if I paid you £100, like $200, let's say, you know, to show my work, could you do it? And you'll look at it and go, no, it's terrible, I can't. Then you can't afford to, you know, buy that. So if your work's good, I'm very lucky. My editor likes to show my work. It kind of works out. Hopefully in the future somebody will see my work and they'll say, we'll give you a job and we'll pay you loads of money. It has happened in the past, not loads of money, but you know, enough. It's not, I mean, everybody's taking photographs now. Everybody's got a camera is a photographer or a potential photographer. Just because you've got a good camera doesn't mean you're a good photographer. That's the difference. So what I would say to you from my own perspective is, never give up. If you're interested in something, keep on doing it and never ever let anybody change your mind. You know? So like, go after it. Be passionate, be keen, be interested, and follow whatever you're interested in. So it's like, if you got a really good idea for a story of your own, and you went out and you wrote it all down, got all the information, it's like, there's lots of trappers working out of Galena, let's say. There's like a guy out in a log cabin miles away who's trapping right now. If you went with a friend and you went to see him and interviewed him, which is something that I might do after I've seen this remote family in a month's time, you could stay with them or go and visit them for the day. Take photographs, write a little story. There's nothing stopping any of you in this room from sending back to the New York Times in New York, the Huffington Post, you know, all those big names, and then they can publish it. And then you start to make your name. Like, who is this guy from this Galena school? Where is Galena, Alaska? What is, this person's really cool. They've got a really good style of writing. And the next minute, you've got yourself a job. And like, I'm down here and you're up there. And I'm saying, hey, do you remember me? So, you know, be inspired, you know, it's something that anybody can get a job doing. That's what's really cool. There's no boundaries or borderlines. It's a kind of this invisible thing which is like, you can't really give it an identity, you know. So I'll give you one example, and then I'll shut up. Who's heard of Wales? Yeah, everybody's heard of the country Wales. So in Great Britain, the country. Oh, were you thinking of the village?
I was thinking of a fish.
Oh, that's so cool.
You did say whale.
That's awesome. Good answer. Okay. Okay, well I come from a country called Great Britain. There's 4 countries in that country. It was England, Ireland, Scotland and Wales. Now, 1999, I went on holiday to Wales and I lived in a tent for 10 weeks and got myself a job. And I liked the country because it had mountains and interesting people. And I came from a country which is flat in England. You know, it's kind of boring for me. So I thought, oh, this is kind of different. You know, it looks kind of cool. I had my motorbike. I got myself a job as a security guard. It was nothing special. I got really minimum wage, you know. And I was living in a tent for about 10 weeks. I started taking photographs of people. My photographs got better. So I started taking photographs for exhibitions. So what I would say to all of you is, tomorrow I'll talk about photography. You take good enough photographs, you can go to Mr. A and say, what do you think of my 20 photographs here of gym or wrestling or whatever? Can I have a little exhibition of my own in the school? And he goes, yes, because your photographs are really good. So you've got 20 photographs, you put them in picture frames, you stick them against the wall, you've got your first exhibition. How cool is that? Okay, you can also put writing next to it as well. So that's one idea for you. Okay, so I used to do that. I used to make exhibitions. I built my own motorbike. It had 3 wheels. It was called a trike. It was crazy. Who's seen the film Mad Max? Yeah, it was like something from Mad Max. It was really cool. It was about 11 feet long. It was black. It was ugly. It looked crazy. And you didn't have to wear a motorbike helmet. So I had to wear like a Russian furry hat, you know, with sunglasses. I thought I was so cool. With a cigarette in my mouth. I wouldn't have made that. And I used to take photographs. I was living in a caravan because it was cheap. I would develop my own black and white camera film. I would scan it. I would print it, put it in picture frames, and I'd put them on the back seat of my trike, ride it to the gallery, put them on the wall, put little bits of writing next to it so people knew the names of people. People would come and look at it. It would get in the local newspapers. Also, try and get your work. I know that you are the newspaper, but you know, write about yourselves and make a note of it. It's interesting to have a record of what you've done so people remember. It's proof. Yeah? Okay. So then, you've got the world, you've got North America, you've got South America. You know South America? At the bottom, you've got a region called Patagonia, which is the southern half of Argentina. And I discovered that it was a colony of people from Wales who had gone out to the bottom of Argentina, where they speak Spanish, in 1865. And the reason being, they didn't like the English, okay? So they wanted to get away from the English, and they wanted to start their own country called Wales, like a new Wales, in the bottom of Argentina. I was like, this can't be true, this is amazing. So I've been living in Wales by that point for about 5 or 6 years, and I got a very small grant from an arts council, always trying to find ways to get money to help you do what you want to do. I flew out to Argentina, and I went down there, and they've got Welsh flags, so it's like you guys going to China and seeing the American flag. It's like you don't expect it, it's just so way out there. So I went to Patagonia for a month, but it was so interesting, I ended up spending 2.5 years out there. So basically we talk about the people from Wales in a new country trying to make their own new country away from their original, but we're talking 8,000 miles away. So I had a book published from there. The reason why I liked it, you've got the desert, so you've got sand, you've got like little plants growing, you've got snakes, you've got armadillos. Who knows what an armadillo is? Yeah, cool. You've got those running around, which are really awesome. And then you've got people living in really old houses, but nothing's changed. It's like a time capsule. For me, it was like going into a museum, and you've got people living in houses built in maybe 1880. Nothing has changed. The walls haven't been painted. Why? Because they can't afford to. So everything is left to kind of deteriorate, and it's like going to a little museum. So I was there, and I stayed there 2.5 years. Instead of going home after a month, I spent 2.5 years there. And I had a book published. Okay. So I left there, and I made a journey to Washington, D.C. Who's heard of the Smithsonian?
Yep.
Excellent. Well, the Smithsonian have an exhibition once a year called a festival, and it's on the National Mall or Mall. How do you say it?
Mall.
Mall. National Mall. So you've got the National Mall in Washington, D.C., and they've got this festival, and every year they celebrate a different country. In 2009, they were celebrating Wales. the country that I was coming from, Great Britain. I'm not actually Welsh, but it's very close. It's only like 200 miles away. Okay, so I was there, and then at the end of that, I thought, what am I going to do? I've got a little bit of money, I've got a motorbike here, I want to do a road trip, so should I go to LA? Well, if you go from New York to LA, it's so quick. It's 5 days on a motorbike, and when you get there, what do you go? What do? You go to the beach, you go to museums, you know, go shopping, buy food. For me, it's not really that interesting. So I Googled the most westerly point of the United States, thinking that it was LA, because I didn't know anything. Instead, the result came up, Wales. I was like, what? Well, I've already been to the country Wales in Great Britain. I've already been to Patagonia where there are Welsh people. There's a place called Wales in America. Well, there is. So has anybody heard of Wales, which is really close to us here?
Here?
Yeah!
I bet you there are people in this room who've actually been to Wales.
Not knowing it?
Yeah, Wales.
Have you heard of Wales,
Seward
Alaska?
Peninsula? Yes.
Okay. You know there's 3 knuckles in on the map of Alaska? Yeah? Okay, so you got these, and we're about where the spot is on my hand.
Wait, do this.
Galena is about here.
Wait, try this. Try doing this. Make a lot more sense.
Oh yes. Okay.
No. No, pinky close. This finger out. No. Other hand. Right hand.
Okay, right hand.
Pointer finger out.
Yeah.
There. Now extend your thumb as far back as you can.
Okay.
Good enough.
Okay. So you've got your Lucian chain comes
Yes.
down here, and you've got Juneau down here.
Yes.
And then right on the end of this point, that's the most westerly point of mainland United States, and it's called Wales. The Inuit name is King Inuit. Okay? But it was named Wales after the Prince of Wales from Britain by a whaling captain from Britain who was passing in a ship in the 1800s. And he goes, I'm going to call this Prince of Wales after our Prince of Wales who was like, excuse me, the King or Queen's son back in Britain. Because in those days, if you discovered something new, you would name it for somebody important and you would still call that now. Anyway, so I was in the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. I took the, I think they call it the China bus. It's like a really cheap bus you can get for $20 from Washington, D.C. all the way up to New York City. And then my motorbike arrived by ship from Argentina, so I got on my motorbike. And I went from New York City to Denver, because I wasn't sure if I was going to go to LA. And Denver's like halfway across the states to LA, and I was like, well, if I get to LA, it's going to be really boring. And I was talking to a friend with internet, like with email, and he said, why don't you go up to your original plan, go up to Wales? Like, it just sounds so cool. So I saw the mountains behind Denver and Colorado, and I was like, wow, if I go to LA, I'm going to be there in 2 days, I'm going to be on the beach really bored, I'm going to carry on my motorcycle journey. So I had this gigantic, crazy sports tour, a really powerful big motorbike. I went north, and I just kept on going. I was sleeping on the side of a road, I was having all these great adventures, not really eating properly, drinking lots of coffee. And I went through the length of Canada, I got into Alaska, I went to Anchorage, and I went up to Fairbanks. Got to Fairbanks, and then I phoned up a park ranger, and I said, where's the road to Wales? And he just started laughing. He said, where are you from? I said, England. He said, you guys have got no idea. He said, there is no road out here. I said, well, what do you mean? How do you get around? He said, we fly or we take a boat. And not many people take a boat. I said, well, I want to take my motorbike across land to Wales. And he said, it's impossible, you'll never do it. So what I ended up doing was leaving my motorbike in Fairbanks, and then getting on a little aeroplane to Galena, and I was in Galena, I can't believe it, for maybe like 20 minutes before I got another plane. I never realised I'd come back here again to see you guys, you know? So I continued to know, and I got on a little plane to Wales. Well then no, I didn't have much money. So I went up to the guy running the airport, like for Raven, Alaska, and I said, do you have like a little plane that has post box, parcels and packages and letters? Is it like a postal plane? And he started laughing. He said, we have one plane. And it's for everything, so passengers and for boxes. I said, well, can you put me on the plane because like I've got no money, can you fly me out for free? And he said, I guess so, come back tomorrow. So I had a tent, and it was really cold, and I put my tent up outside the airport in Nome, and I spent the night there. And in the morning I got up, I went back, and I said, can I go on the plane? He said, sure, just get your bag, and we're ready to go. So I sat next to the pilot, and I didn't know where I was going, but I was just going to this Inuit village called Wales just because of the name, because I spent all that time in the country called Wales and I wanted to see what the Eskimo, sorry I say Eskimo, that's what people call them, you know, Eskimo village called Wales. So I'm sitting next to a pilot in a little plane, it's got 6 seats, seeing the wrong way in front of me, the airstrip, like when you come into Galena, but it's all gravel. And I remember just gulping. It's like, what am I doing coming here, you know? And I couldn't see any houses either. So I jumped out, and the rucksack was chucked out, and he turned around and took off. And I was there all alone. It's like, what do I do next? You know, I've got my cameras, I'm a photographer, I'm here to take some photographs of these people. So by that time, I made a contact with the internet, the only white guy living there, and I went to see him. He was working in his son's shop selling soda. I said, hi Dan, hi Ed, so you made it. And he knew I was coming up from New York, and he couldn't believe it, because it's a big journey. You know, so I put my tent up outside his workshop, and I was there for 3 weeks, and I took photographs. Okay, so years went by, I went back home, and I did different things, like I've done loads of different types of projects. Anyway, bless you. So I decided I wanted to go back, because I had some really great photographs. Who knows what a muskox is? Everybody knows what a muskox is. Well, one charged me, and I got a photograph. Can you believe that? So I had this big camera I was using, and my buddy said, if it charges at you, don't turn around and run, because it will trample you and kill you. So just stand your ground. Well, I thought he was joking until it actually happened. So I stood there just shaking. I looked up, and it skidded to a halt, and like stones were flying up from its hooves. And it kind of snorted. It was really angry because I wouldn't run away, I wasn't chicken. It turned away, it went back to all its wives because he was a big bull. And he looked at me again. He put his head down and he charged a second time. And again I hit him. And he was like between me, like you, and me here. And I was like, oh my God. And then when he stopped, I went, click. I didn't say cheese, but I took his photograph. I got a really good photograph. And that photograph is in this book. So, I went there with nothing. And I'll finish talking because it's almost midday, but I went there with absolutely nothing, just my cameras and my camera film, and I went to take photographs, and like at the end of it you think, well, I've got some photographs which are good enough for a family holiday album maybe, that you can show your family, but there's nothing really of substance to it. So I knew I had to go back again. So I went back 2 more times, and then the outcome is a book that you can go to Barnes & Noble in Anchorage or Fairbanks and buy. So this is for sale. And this is Wales, a portrait of an Alaska village. Okay, so there's nothing to stop any of you. If I knew, if I was listening to me talk 20 years ago, and I was in your shoes, I would be going out and making books like this already, because all of you can do this at your age. There's colour photographs, but unfortunately the publisher wanted to keep the cost down. It's much cheaper to print in black and white. But anyway, when you open it up, this is hardcover with a sleeve, paper sleeve. You've got a photograph of me and a little bit of a history about me. So when people open it, they know who I am and what I'm doing. And then, normally it's nice in the front of a book to have a map, so people understand where the place is. So, like, Era is now Raver. Era helped me, so I put the logo on the front. Snugpack still sponsor me now, and they give me clothing, cold weather clothing. And Pentax, I was sponsored by Cameras, now I'm sponsored by Olympus. So there's a history of Wales, so you can have a history of Galena. And this is what I want to do for Galena. I want to make a book about Galena eventually, so I keep on coming back and interviewing you, and then you can have your faces in the book here too. Yeah?
Why don't you work with these guys to supply stories and photos with you?
Well, exactly. I mean, you could have your own book. You don't necessarily need me. I could guide you, Mr. A could guide you, but you could create your own book. So you could go to your family members, if you've got lots of family in Galena, you could photograph all of the members of your family, write stories about them, or interview them, get their own words, submit them, and then you can put them all into a book, and you've beaten me to it. You've actually made your own book about Galena before I have. So, because of Mr. A. Brr.
You're giving him ideas, and he will run with this.
There you go. So that is what Wales looks like. So I walked up to the top of a mountain, and then you've got the shoreline, and that's the closest point to Russia. So on a clear day, you can actually see Russia, Siberia from there. So that's the village. It's tiny. It's like here. It's less people. It's like 145 people. You land on the gravel runway, and then you've got people living in houses along the shore. And the biggest building is the school, obviously. You know, we're busy teaching people. You've got a map, and then you start with photographs of people flying there. There's a guy who lives there who's in an aeroplane. You can see the sea, you can see the mountains. We're putting everything like here comes in by air. So you guys already know all of this. So you've got photographs of snow, photographs of ice, like the landscape, but kind of like puts the village in perspective. It puts it in locations you can understand. They've got whale jaw bones, which show visitors that are still hunting whale. Like here, you can have moose antlers, which I've seen everywhere. They do occasionally get moose there, but it's above the tree line. There's no trees. Here, you get trees, you get more moose. Yeah, so that's like your identity. Okay.
That's right.
You're hunting walrus. Unfortunately, you can't hunt them there because you don't have any sea, but I guess you hunt a lot of salmon. You fish for a lot of salmon in the summertime. And then, unfortunately, these should really be colour photographs because colour, they look a lot better. You've got a muskox head. So this guy living in this house, he's a hunter. He's proud of that fact. So he's got muskox heads rotting outside. It's very cold, so they take ages to rot. But people going past know, he's the guy that kills little muskox because he's got them sitting outside. You know? And then you've got people skinning salmon, tanning salmon. They're making leather out of the salmon skins, which I guess you do here as well. And then this is a house I lived in. It's like home built. It's like really well insulated, but you can't even get through the door because there's so much snow. I guess you guys are used to that as well. You constantly got to dig it out. And there's a grandmother, like packing her grandson there on her back going to church. Picking Labrador tea. So this lady's cutting Labrador tea for her husband to drink. You know, you soak it into water. Yeah.
I hate to interrupt, but we are almost done.
Got it,
Can I
yes,
ask-
you're right.
Can I ask the class to stand up and we'll take a picture with that?